The UK has backed down on plans to break international law, coming to an agreement with the EU on post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland. London says it will withdraw the most controversial parts of the internal market bill that would have let Boris Johnson's government override the Brexit withdrawal agreement. But the post-Brexit trade deal is still under discussion as both sides say significant differences remain. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, reports.
After days, weeks, months of talks, the Brexit trade negotiations are stuck. Not even two lengthy phone calls between the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson could break the deadlock, and the mood music remains gloomy.
But I've got to be honest with you, I think that the situation at the moment is very tricky. I think that our friends have just got to understand that the UK has left the European Union in order to be able to exercise democratic control over the way we do things. And then there's also the issue of fisheries, where we're a long way apart still. But, you know, hope springs eternal, and I'll do my best to sort it out if we can.
But some progress was made today, with the UK agreeing that the international law-breaking changes to the withdrawal agreement will be removed.
Given the limited time before the transition period ends, it was essential to reach a shared understanding on these questions so that the withdrawal agreement can be fully operational as of 1st of January 2021. Our objective has been clear all along: to protect the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, maintain peace, stability and prosperity on the island of Ireland, and preserve the integrity of the EU's single market.
That, however, is just one jigsaw piece in a much wider agreement, and there is concern that the prospects of no deal is growing.
Especially in the European Parliament, but I think also in European capitals, impatience is growing. We are 3 weeks before the end of a transition period, and we still don't know if at all we'll be able to find an agreement. And if not, let's not forget, we must have votes on contingency measures, to deal with the impact of a possible no deal. And also, of course, citizens, but also companies all over Europe, but also in Britain, are getting really impatient now.
Boris Johnson is due to travel to Brussels later this week, as are EU leaders too. Meanwhile, talks will continue, but ultimately decisions will have to be made to make a deal or not. Darren McCaffrey, Euronews, Brussels.
And let's cross live now to Brussels, where we're joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, a major stepping stone has been crossed with the agreement of the Northern Ireland implementation deal. Can you tell us more about why this is so significant?
So this actually relates back to the original agreement that was signed, this time last year, the withdrawal agreement. And in that, there was a special position left out for Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was there to ensure that the border in Ireland, Annalise, remains as it currently is, as free and frictionless as it is, that there was no going to be hard border on the island of Ireland. But that meant that essentially many of the customs checks that would have taken place, considering the whole of the UK is leaving the EU, then shifted to the Irish Sea to goods being checked travelling between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, this angered many Conservative and Unionist MPs who didn't like it. They thought essentially it meant a divergence internally inside the UK, keeping Northern Ireland more closely aligned to the EU. Now, back in September, the British government suggested that it was going to change those protocols retrospectively within the withdrawal agreement, and that would itself, admittedly, according to the British government, broken international law. That then provoked a massive row here in Brussels, with MEPs and indeed EU leaders suggesting that they would not agree to a trade agreement unless the withdrawal agreement was implemented in full. Now, what seems to have happened today is the British have done somewhat of a U-turn, though they have managed to get concessions on the number of goods that will be checked travelling from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. And through those concessions, they've essentially agreed to uphold the withdrawal agreement as it was signed as I say, this time last year. What does it all mean, though, in terms of the Brexit jigsaw? Well, it does help, obviously. It is what many people say as an olive branch, essentially, to these ongoing talks on the future trade agreement. And it does mean that one of the obstacles to that deal has finally fallen down.
Now, what's been the reaction in Brussels, where you are, to the news?
So, as I say, many people do welcome it. They clearly think it's a progressive step, though I did hear someone suggest earlier, an Irish politician, saying that it was less an olive branch, more an olive twig, in the sense that it was simply the UK fulfilling the agreements under international law that it already had signed up to. But as I say, it doesn't make any of the other issues that are making this trade deal really tricky go away, like, for example, fishing or the level playing field, the rules and regulations that the EU wants the UK to still adhere to after the transition period ends, and indeed governance, who gets to decide what rules are broken and who gets to arbiter punishment in those circumstances. All those big issues where there are significant differences, we're told, still remain, and that is why all will hinge on this intervention, this visit by Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, expected later on this week in those face-to-face talks with Ursula von der Leyen. Though there is a feeling that as difficult as and troublesome as things are, the very fact that he is coming to Brussels is a sign, at least, that the British Prime Minister thinks that a deal can be done. Now, I had a chance, as you may have saw, to speak to Katy Perry. She is a Dutch MEP. She was in my news report a couple of minutes ago, and I carried on by asking her, did she recognise that in order to get this Brexit trade agreement, that both sides needed to compromise, and that meant not just the UK, Annalise, but it also meant the EU too.
Negotiations, you always have two parties there. I think there has been already quite some movement from both sides in these negotiations, but not on the crucial issues. We know that on the level playing field, this is something that is crucial to the EU countries. We do want to have open trade with Britain and free trade, but it also has to be fair trade. And that is what is one of the sticky points there. On fisheries, we, of course, acknowledge that Britain is no longer a member of the European Union, which means that we need to have new agreements on fisheries. And we also understand that, of course, here Britain perhaps has more cards on the table. However, let's not forget, even if you catch the fish and you can't sell it on the European market, you have a problem.
So does that sound like a not too subtle message to maybe Michel Barnier, but more specifically Emmanuel Macron, that Europe needs to give Britain a bit more on fish, and that's fair enough?
No, I don't mean to say that we need to give a bit more. It's logical that we can't accept the same conditions as when Britain was a member of the European Union.
What I'm trying to get at then is essentially, you say that both sides need to compromise. Let's not talk about Britain. Where does the EU need to compromise on? What would you like to see the EU move on in order to try and get to a deal?
Well, to be honest, I have the feeling that in the negotiations, we moved already to the maximum possible when it comes to quota discussions on fisheries. I mean, what the United Kingdom wants is simply impossible for 8 of the coastal states in the European Union. So I have the feeling that Michel Barnier and his team are already at the edge of how far the European Union can go. And this shouldn't come as a surprise. I think our positions and the so-called lending zone was clearly visible from the EU for the last months. And unfortunately, not the same can be said from London.
Yeah, but you can't at one point say that both sides need to compromise and then say, well, the European Union's gone as far as it can. At the end of the day, this is a political negotiation. If you want to get a deal, if fishermen, want to get access to British waters, they're going to need a deal. So why don't you just say to Michel Barnier and Emmanuel Macron and everyone else and say, well, you need to go a bit further?
No, I think
they can do. It's not written in stone. They can go further if they want to.
Of course, but the question is, who are they helping and who are they damaging? And I think they will damage a lot of EU consumers, not just on the short run, but on the long run, if we give more away when it comes to level playing field. We don't want to have an unfair competition when it comes to lowering label standards, lowering environmental standards. And let's not forget, of course, there are two sides at the table, but we're talking here about the EU. Michel Barnier is negotiating on behalf of 450 million European Union citizens. I mean, of course, it's a negotiation, but it's also not so strange that in this case, the bigger internal market is a bit less flexible than the UK should be if it wants to have an agreement. And of course, we don't want a no deal, but a no deal will hurt Britain much more than any of the other EU countries.
Just finally on Brexit, do you get the sense that, I think a lot of people in Britain are, but elsewhere in Europe are bored of Brexit? They don't want to hear about it.
I can imagine.
Is that what you're hearing as well? You want kind of both sides to move on?
Well, I think, let's be honest. What are people's biggest concern right now is the pandemic, of course, all the economic effects this is having. And this has been consuming, of course, not just the news, but our daily lives for the last couple of months. So, of course, this is also today when Britain is having the first vaccination day. Of course, I can imagine there's more attention to that than to their prime minister heading to Brussels for a deal or a no deal. However, let's not forget, for instance, just to give you an example, in the Netherlands, according to estimations, with a no deal, 70,000 people, 70, will lose their jobs. This is something that is about the livelihood of people in the midst of a pandemic with already economic problems that we shouldn't put as politicians on top of the existing anxieties which are already there in society. So in this regard, I can imagine patience is running out. People are fed up with Brexit, but let's just find an agreement which is good for both Britain and the European Union. And let's hope in the future we can have a little bit more of a friendly relationship.
And it is really interesting, Annelies, actually, when you listen to, what's gone over the last couple of months. Clearly, Michel Barnier and David Frost, having gone around and around and around, have really run out of negotiating space and indeed the issues that they feel that they can grapple with. That is why, in the end, it will be a political decision about how far both sides are willing to compromise. And interesting on that last point about people being bored of Brexit, it may be one of the things that weighs quite heavily on Boris Johnson. After all, he got elected last year on a kind of motto or on a platform of finishing Brexit, getting Brexit done. And there's a feeling that if they go into the next year, 2021, without a deal and all the potential economic chaos that would mean, that may be unforgivable to some voters, some of them that may well have voted for Boris Johnson. As I say, that may well weigh heavily on the British Prime Minister as he decides whether he needs to compromise further to get a deal over the line.
Darren McCaffrey live for us in Brussels. Thank you very much for that.